You're listening to a CQI podcast.
Welcome to Quality Impact, a new podcast from the Chartered Quality Institute. I'm your host, Rashad Issa, Chairman of the CQI. Over the course of this podcast series, I'll be introducing you to quality professionals across a wide variety of industries, such as construction, rail, defense, nuclear, and more. Today, we're looking into auditing for the future, focusing on industry secrets and simplifying ISO standards. Joining us are Ian Mitchell and Sandy Domingos Shipley. Ian is the co-founder and CEO of DeepFathom, specializing in advanced auditing and management systems. Alongside him is Sandy, an ISO consultant at the Systems Link and author of How to Build a World-Class Business One Brick at a Time. Welcome, Ian and Sandy.
Thanks for the invite.
Hi, lovely to meet you, Rashad. Thank you for the invite as well.
I am looking forward for this conversation today. So let's start like we always start with all of our guests. Ian, how do you define quality?
The way I define quality is the quality management system is a set of processes and procedures that help the business as a living organism actually consistently meet consumer demands, their business objectives, manage risks, and actually drive change and improvement within a constantly changing environment, be it political, be it economic, be it social, be it technological, be it legal or environmental. And the importance of actually quality management systems in today's and the future's climate is that there's more volume and variety actually coming into systems, and the ability to actually become learning organizations to keep that quality to meet the current and future demands is stronger than ever. So for me, quality is absolutely central to an organization's resilience and its relevance for the future.
For me, quality is about delivering value with clarity and ease, hence why I use Lego analogies to try to educate the people I work with. Because like Ian said, because there's so much out there, it can be overwhelming. So if you keep it simple, therefore you can grow with it as opposed to not. So yeah, for me, it's about clarity, ease, and keep it simple.
Thank you very much, both. So let's start with Ian. From your experience, what's the most difficult thing auditors face today while performing assurance tasks?
There's one message that is resounding. I've just got back from San Diego at the Sustainable Brands event, and the one message that everybody was screaming is that internal and external auditors are completely overwhelmed to meet all the demands, all the compliance, all the reporting, the new regulations coming at them. And it's that there's the velocity and the volume and variety coming at them. And all they see in front of them is complexity. And actually what they need to do is they need to get through the complexity to simplicity. And actually what they need to do, in my humble opinion, is to start looking at different ways, different tools and different approaches to these problems. And I think once they can start getting the other side of that, it will actually free up budgets. The other thing which they're finding super challenging is the cost of auditing and compliance is increasing all the time. And so where there were teams of, let's say, 10 people, organizations now have teams of 30 people. So they're having to justify the value of compliance and the value of the auditing that they are doing and actually what that means to the organization. And so actually there's a whole change here that auditors are faced with, which is actually when I do something, it's now what, so what, and how do I create that value? And I think it's a great question that they're asking. And I think it's a really exciting time actually to be an auditor because you can actually help organizations actually go through that transformation process.
Now what, so what, and how can I add value? So with all of those challenges, higher demands for compliance and tightening budgets as well, if we are to start a revolution and change the way we conduct audits, how would that revolution look like?
Well, that's a great question. I think the big problem they've got is that auditing, traditional auditing is very slow. It's very expensive, it's very time consuming, and it's highly disruptive for people across not only within the organization, but also supply chains or value chains, and also external stakeholders affected by the organization. And so the first question I think they need to do is go, well, how can we increase the speed? How can we increase the amount of objective evidence we're getting with all this variety coming at us? Also, actually, how can I then use this information in a way to create simplicity in the reporting across these multiple areas? And then actually, how can I have simple, straightforward, actionable tasks off the back of it that are actually going to accelerate the progress of our organization towards our business objectives, towards our compliance objectives, and also to actually drive more value now and in the future. I think that if you can increase the speed, increase the objective evidence, increase the variety of that, and make it cheaper and speed up the reporting, and if you can actually then get the consequences of where you are to really understand what that means, both good and bad, so that you can then actually understand the active and emergent risk. And then actually from the risk, you can create opportunity and then create simple pathways to drive change and improvement across the organization. I think the key thing is through this complexity is creating simplicity and giving the auditors that. So actually people can then make simple progressive steps to accelerate their progress.
And with all of this focus on simplicity and speed and making sure the organization gets the benefit out of those audits, we are living in a world of artificial intelligence, and there are lots of tools available for us. But how does AI play a role in helping auditors build better tools?
I think AI can play many, many different roles. And one thing AI does very, very well is it takes a lot of data and it can help you process that data. And the key thing is its role to actually create generative AI. And with generative AI, you get clear articulation of where you're at and actually what to do next. And so I think AI can play a key role in that. Also, and this feels counterintuitive, AI actually can be, and this is kind of our big focus, is how we use AI to look at the human and the living elements of the organization. And because the temptation with AI is to look at a lot of lagging data, to look at a lot of stuff around compliance. And my view around compliance is, and just going to the level of compliance is a bit like telling your kids when they're at school, just go for a D. It's the most efficient way to get through school. It's the least amount of energy and effort, and you can then be more efficient as a student, more effective as a student moving forward. For me, compliance is a vital first rung, but actually what you need to be doing is actually understanding the organic influences on the organization and actually how you increase the maturity and the capability of your behaviors and become more aligned, and actually as a result turn into a learning organization. For us, we focus on generative AI to understand those aspects of actually what is going on inside your organization, understand the quality of the interactions between the stakeholders in that organization, and then to focus on how you can create more alignment across the interactions and the stakeholders, and actually more capability to then drive that transformation. So that's our particular focus, but there are many, many, many other areas where AI can help.
So as a starting point, as an auditor, if I just understand how generative AI could help me produce some of this information based on data, whether by visualizing it, whether by producing some trending analysis, those basic tasks, that would be the starting point of how it could help me. And then the more I can grow with the business, the more I could see how I can tweak it.
Yes, and I think we call it blended auditing. So for example, rather than spending 5 weeks walking around the clipboard, trying to interview people, which is time consuming, and it's hard to get the objective evidence consistently from that. The first thing I would do is go, okay, I can do this 4 times faster using generative AI. I'm just going to run that piece of technology to actually collect 80% of the information I need to have, or it could be 50%, depending on the complexity of your organization and what it's doing. That would be the first thing. So I'm collecting data more accurately and way more faster. The second question I'll be asking is, how can I use AI to actually analyze the complexity across the system? And so it's making all those connections around those disparate interactions across the system to actually then develop a deepened understanding around what is going on. So the way that we liken it is traditional auditing or analog auditing has got some wonderful perceptions and capabilities. So this is certainly not to say don't do it anymore, is to say do it in conjunction with AI. And so for me, it's a bit like a black and white photo, which is you can have incredible images from that. And then the generative AI is almost like an MRI scan. so you can understand the soft tissue around what's really going on around the complexity of that organization. And the two together creates a very interesting dialogue. So that would be one area which I'd say focus on very quickly. The other thing is then using generative AI and your other information you've collected to understand your active risks and your emergent risks into the organization. And when you understand the consequence of your active risk and your emergent risk, you can then actually start taking corrective measures before it even becomes an issue. Or when it does become an issue, you can actually learn and change and put remedial action in there. And as a result, you're driving quality from the get-go, and you're also maintaining quality from the get-go because you're not allowing emergent risk to then always become active risk. You're actually resolving it before it turns into an active risk. And the ability to understand that and to then prioritize where to focus your energy makes it much, much easier. That's another area which I'd look at. The final area for us as an auditor is it's not just ISO that people have to audit and report on. You've got a corporate sustainability reporting directive, you've got health and safety, you can have ISO 27001, but you can also have SOC 2, and there's so many overlapping areas of this. So the question I'd be asking myself as an auditor is, to what degree is there an overlap? And how can I audit multiple things at once? So I actually have integrated audits, because if you think about it, you are auditing the management system, and in effect, you have one management system across your entire organization, which goes into focusing on the core management system, the core processes, and the supporting processes to deliver what you need now and in the future. So the rest, if you analyze that properly, the rest of them are reporting items to different standards and different outputs and risks and compliance and legal requirements of the management system. So again, that'd be an area which I'll be focus on. The final area, because there's so many areas that AI can help, as I could talk all day on it, but the final area which I would start really focusing on is how you can use AI to become a learning organization. And because when you free up your energy and your auditing and compliance horsepower and team and resources to actually go, okay, now we have this information, how do we drive transformation? How do we become a learning organization? Because when you have that culture of a learning organization, as all these new things, some of which you predicted, some of which you didn't predict, you can actually then start as a team across all your different stakeholders reacting to that or proactively acting on it, and actually understand the interconnections around how it impacts one another across the organization. So for me, compliance is great to have it because you're there, you've met a standard. But for me, that's like a D. And an A star is becoming a highly mature, capable learning organization. And when you look at the complexities that are coming at us, I think organizations really need to be evolving into that.
We're going to touch base a little bit about the mindset of transformation, and built with how we start with the revolution of auditing, making sure we focus on risks and talk about beyond compliance. We'll come a little bit in a while to that, but I'd like to work with you, Sandy, on international standards. Before we go into ISO in general, from your experience, what's the most frustrating thing your clients and stakeholders share with you when working with ISO?
I think the biggest issue is that everyone thinks it is a compliance tool, and that's the issue, and that they're doing things because they have to, and they don't understand why it's there. Why does that clause say, I recommend you do this? If people do not understand the whys, how are they going to implement it or work to it in a natural way? So what they do is they work to ISO 9001 or whatever it is as a tick box, because that's what it is. And this is where, the word compliance is a negative in my view, because our approach is very much the way you work is in compliance or is aligned to best practice as opposed to a compliance tool. And because there is auditing every year, that emphasizes that approach of it's compliance. But actually, it's more like a guide. It's a roadmap on how to get from A to Z. And if you look at the chapters within the standard, it's in that order for a particular reason. Chapter 4, leadership, it all starts with leadership. So when I go with my clients and explain why chapter 4 is there, why chapter 5 is in that particular order, it all makes sense. And therefore, then working with my clients, because they understand the whys, it makes it so much easier. It's like, oh, of course. So yeah, for me, it's very much an educational process with them to take away that the archaic view. But if you look back when ISO first started, people saw it as wow, we've got something to help us. Someone has taken time, or a group of individuals got a group of time to give us a tool on how to become better. They loved it. But over time, don't know at what point, people saw it as a tick box, as something else I have to think about, as opposed to, it's just how I work, and that's fine. In the 8 years I've been doing this, it's by far been the biggest challenge.
So with knowing this challenge in mind and hearing Ian say that auditing is not only about ISO, there are lots of other international standards in different areas and different disciplines that could be used as well and combined. Can we start with a new approach to implementing ISO and helping businesses grow?
For me, that's why I use Lego analogy quite a lot, because everyone understands it. And if you think about it, I'll just tell you what I tell my clients. So if you think about a Lego box, you buy a Lego set and all the components are in the box and you come with a manual. Now, those components are very much like every business. So whether you're Google or whether you are a small accountancy firm, you are built with the same foundations. People, money, trade, it's all the same. The difference is how you implement them, right? That manual, imagine if it wasn't there in the box and all you have is your vision, which is the picture on the box. How long do you think it would take for you to build that? How many mistakes would you do when building that new car set or whatever it is on the image? It would cost you a lot of time, and that's about it. But in the business side, it costs you money. So why wouldn't you want to look at ISO frameworks? And I do believe 9001 is a fantastic one for whatever standard in the world you're doing. Why wouldn't you want a guide that is telling you how to be more efficient and better so that you can get to your 5-year plan, so you can get to whatever you want to be? When I talk about Lego, it's about simplifying the worry of this big monstrous thing that actually it's just the way you place an order, the way you lead a team. It's just doing your job, but we're tweaking it to make it better. But they can only do that if they understand the logic behind why this organization said, by doing this, it's good practice. That's all it is. It's a guide. And that's kind of my approach, is really just keep it to the core of what they actually do.
This requires a lot of skill set from quality professionals and auditors to help their businesses understand the benefit of ISO, or in fact, of any standardized discipline that they have to abide by and perform beyond compliance. And soft skills, or power skills, as Project Management Institute refers to them, are very important. So how well does communication play a role in helping those businesses?
Yeah, so communication is one of the chapters in the book, because I think it gets overlooked a lot. People focus on a lot of other things, but actually nothing is as efficient unless the communication is right. Now, there's a lot of barriers that people don't consider. Now, being dyslexic, I see the world very differently. So maybe I'm just a bit more aware. It could be other we are a global place. We all interact globally. People can travel and work wherever they want. So we have language issues, cultural differences. So if you're from Japan and you work in the UK, trying to communicate what you're trying to do doesn't always work. So being aware, working from home, that's the most common. It's like, how do you improve communication without being boring or people are going to switch off? What is it? So for me, it really is about trying to understand who you're talking to, really understand, are they learners? How do they learn? Are they in-person learners? Are they e-learners? I'm dyslexic. I need to be in person. I cannot do online training because that's not how my brain processes information. When I start any project, I always take a stock of who I'm dealing with, who we've got as an organization. And I say to the leaders, to the managers, says, tell us what's the breakdown. And I speak to everybody because I want to say that whenever I'm communicating, I want to know I've gone into their world in terms of what they find comfortable. Therefore, I know that I've covered, that I'm not going to be repeating myself in 6 months' time because someone didn't get it. And Ian, you'll see a lot sometimes people will say, oh, I signed this document and I understood it. Did you really? How do you know? And it's like, how do you evidence understanding? And this is where understanding how to communicate within your organization is key, because you know you've asked and therefore you've taken that into account.
We always talk about leading with intent, and then why communicating shouldn't be with intent. Two people are never the same. So it's a very good point. Once you understand your internal customer and how they respond to changing requirements, changing regulations, how would they best learn it to help their day-to-day job become easier and more efficient? Once you understand that, then you can cater the message accordingly.
But the other thing is, for example, when making changes within an organization, I'm a really strong believer in storytelling. If you use a story or a scenario, an analogy, if you use one of those tools to explain the change, people will understand, because we're all tired of people changing, because we've got a new manager or because we've got a new... There's always something that is directing the change. And unless you connect it to something, people are going to think you're on a power trip. Oh, it's another change. Oh, Ian's off again. He wants to change. It's trying to find logic. And if you connect it to a story and you connect everyone to bring them along the journey of that change.
A journey. Why for a change? Understanding the different type of customers that we work with. Challenges in the coming months and year, ESG, AI, all are factors that we have to think of. With all of that wider environment that we're working with, how does auditing in 2025 look like, Ian?
I think it's a really good question, because the auditing people do, when you have change coming in the whole time, I completely agree with the philosophy of you have to understand why. Because if people don't understand why, you won't get any drivers from it, you won't get any performance, you won't get any understanding. People also need to understand the impact that why has on them individually in their role, and how they're recognized and compensated, but also what they do. They also need to understand the impact of their actions on other stakeholders in the organization and outside of the organization. And then the next thing is they then need to understand how to interact with other people and create value chains and to think differently in different approaches, and how to contribute collectively towards that goal. And then if people understand the alignment and the capability and the maturity of their behaviors, and to be constantly in that dialogue, as discussed before, is if you have a top-down approach of you must do this, you actually don't get the buy-in, you don't get the change in the behaviors, you don't get the alignment. And actually, so it's creating that from within the organizations to collectively work to a goal. And yes, changes do happen in leadership, changes do happen in management, does happen across team. And actually, if the organization has developed that culture towards quality, the culture towards learning, and actually to that constant change and improvement, you can actually cope with those changes which happen all the time in a much, much, much stronger way. So for me, when you're looking at new ESG laws and regulations, compliance, sustainability, corporate sustainability reporting directive, but also it's health and safety, it's understanding supply chains and value chains, how to, and that's just the beginning of it, because for organizations to actually drive the transformation, they can't just do it through a supply chain approach. They need to actually create value chains with involving multiple stakeholders, some of which they won't be contrasted to at all, to try and create cells of change for which the overall quality objective can be achieved. So it's a totally different way of thinking and philosophy. And so it's not just within the organizations, it's collaborating with other organizations that understand that and willing to contribute this. So this is a huge shift towards quality. huge shift in how we understand and audit quality, and a huge shift actually about how we collaborate and operate towards it. And I personally find it very, very exciting because we can use different tools as well as making sure that we don't lose sight of fundamental areas like communication, storytelling, engagement, the things that make us human through this whole process, which will make us successful as well.
Thing is, when you're making change because of, for example, legislation changes, it's easier to convey because it's a rule. Those things are dictated externally are easier to translate into the organization because there is an element of legal compliance. The worst is when you're trying to make changes of efficiency or smart ways of working internally where it's a concept, and it's getting those concepts into the belief of the organization. Those are the hardest to do. And this is where storytelling, I truly believe, that is key to making people buy into it. And the more you can demonstrate that it works, the more they trust you the next time you make it. And it's those that I work on the most because I think they're harder to bring people into it because there's no one knocking at your door saying, if you don't do this, you'll get a fine. Do you know what I mean? So for me, I get Ian's point totally, but I find it harder when it's the concept of efficiency or the concept of improving the organization, harder to convey.
But I think as well, when people understand why, that's very effective. But I think a step beyond all of that, because you both bring a very important point to the table. Ian started by saying about auditing should make sure it helps the business in forming those little cells that are improving for the ultimate bigger goal of quality objective for the organization to be performing, sustainable, and so on. And you're saying that it's difficult to communicate those efficiencies because it's not rule-based. So instead of, for me personally, just explaining why we're doing that change, what would be more impactful, I sometimes find, is when the why is being communicated from process owners themselves. And that message, the auditors are being recipients to it, with the teams being audited as well, to create that form of we are all on the same page and we are all in it together and we know this is what's going to happen. So how can we work together? Therefore, it's not only the auditing team communicating that change, but it's also being cascaded from the process owner. And hopefully those process owners know how to work with their teams in the Lego approach, getting the bottom up input to make sure that they're all in it together. So it's really a very dynamic, it's not a linear approach. It's very dynamic and there are lots of inputs and outputs to it.
An organization is successful for multiple reasons. And actually what they need to do is all those different reasons need to complement and work as a symphony in that process. And what we find really interesting in our analytics is quite often you have leadership who's trying to drive transformation and they are communicating that through. And then you see that communication potentially being fed through the organization, but the implementation of it being inconsistent through the organization. And so it's when there's that lack of alignment across the organization, not by intention at all, but you start to develop areas where the capabilities or the witness experiences across people in the different facets of the organization's supply chain aren't aligned, and inadvertently they turn into anchors to the transformation. So as in it slows the transformation down. So the key thing is to be able to understand that. So all the different stakeholders are engaged, that they have a voice, that they can, their challenges are understood, and they actually collectively believe in that why, and they're focused on that why. And the ultimate, any organization is a manifestation of human beings, and human beings have belief systems which affect our behaviors. So the most important thing is for people to sharing a common belief of what you're doing, why you're doing, and how you're going to do that, and to then understand how that is manifested in our behaviors, and actually how that is then impacted from an actions point of view, and what the tactical consequences are, and what the strategic consequences are. These
days, people go to work, especially the new generation, where they need to have a sense of purpose when they come to work. And that's very important. So if an organization is having these visions of, I want to get here in 5 years' time, and your objectives that you set from, say, the 9001 point of view are there, you want to show the purpose of those. When you have your staff appraisals, you give them objectives, you give them KPIs, but what's the purpose of them? Why? So I always work with my clients to say, look, when you give your staff their objectives or you talk about your organizational objectives, answer 2 questions for me. And if you can't answer them, they're not the right objectives. The first one is, what weakness or threat are we trying to address with this particular objective? What is it? Or what opportunities are there? If you cannot answer one of those 2, then it's not the right objective to focus on. And the reason we need to do that is that when we look back 12 months' time, 18 months' time, how do we assess effectiveness if we can't remember why we picked it in the first place? When I work with clients, new ones who've had either old management systems or doing it for the first time, when they're trying to come up with objectives or their purpose, they can never sometimes answer those 2 questions. And that's so important because it really helps you understand, are you just picking this objective because it sounds good and I know somebody else has got it? Or do I actually know why I want it? And people, when they come to work 9 to 5, long hours or whatever, and you give them an objective, you want them to know that when they achieve their KPI or objective, they played an active part in the objectives of the organization. So I always say, which of the organizational objectives is this KPI that you've given this person going to help? So at the end of the year, they'll go, do you know what? We've gone up 5% in sales because you've helped achieve X, Y, Z, you personally. And I feel that sometimes the lower you are down the rank within the organization, the more disenfranchised you are because you don't know how you played a part. Companies aren't very good at doing this.
And this is a requirement for me personally as well for auditors. If they don't understand the strategy and its impact and how it's being implemented on all the organization, whether they are internal auditors or external auditors, how are they going to build their audit plan? How are they going to build their risk-based audit program based on that, if the understanding of the strategy and how it cascades top down or how it feeds bottom up is done. So this is a very valid point. I will try and squeeze one more question if possible. You've touched on it already, but if we can just give pointers to how all of this connects together to organizational change and organizational transformation. How can audit, with its future, with its challenges, and with the new environment that's changing for it, can help businesses transform to perform, to sustain their success, and to make sure they're highly engaging with their employees and customers alike?
I'm going to say something which will feel very left field, is if you think about auditors, they're generally a small team in an organization as a percentage of that. So if you are really trying to understand change and what is going on inside your organization, and you've got such a variety of things which you have to comply to, that you have to understand around the transformation. When you look at most management consultancies, there's a 70% failure rate in major transformations in organizations. So if you think about organizations transforming to sustainability requirements or ESGs, you're staring down the barrel of a 70% failure rate. So the question is you need to do something different for this to work at large scale, when you think about all the industries. So my question is, first of all, turn auditing upside down, democratize it. And so because there's just simply not enough auditors to be able to audit quickly enough, understand and drive the changes and improvement fast enough. So what we're doing is obviously let auditors still have their superpowers. You're not taking that away from the tool, but if you're using AI to actually allow the stakeholders to become auditors, and they actually use AI to show what they're witnessing around the behaviors of the organization, the impact that's having on them to do their role, and actually then to give them a voice around actually how they could see change and improvement going. And if you can then analyze that data very, very quickly, what that means is that you can actually navigate through or cross that delta of transformation far more accurately and actually accelerate your progress there. So that would be a key area that I would say actually focus in on.
And what about for you, Sandy?
For me, the key is how you've implemented the management system. If you implement it with fluidity, then it goes naturally with the growth of either the change of the standard or not. So you don't necessarily have to make big changes. So if you look at 27, it's had a change, but if you set it up in a way that is very fluid, then the changes will go with it. It's a lot easier. For me, it's about focusing on people just doing their jobs. If we take away the terminology of the standards and make it just about the individual role, the department's contributions, for me, there is no issues with auditing because the audit process becomes a conversation. It's not because of what clause 4.2 says. It's actually just tell us to have a conversation. So all my clients, when they go through their audits, they just have a conversation with the auditor because the work speaks for itself. It's already there. There's no work to prepare because it's there. So that's my approach. Just do it as your job. Forget about the standard as if it exists. We're just going to implement best practice. And then the audit just happens, if that makes any sense, because it's not an extra thing that we have to think about.
I think also another thing for organizations is organizations need to recalibrate their attitude towards compliance and auditing. If you stop looking at it as a cost and you actually start looking at it as a point of value creation for the organization, and you start looking at actually auditing is intelligence and understanding of what is going on inside your organization, and to turn that into something which will help the organization become a learning organization, to actually be able to learn the skills and the capability and the alignment to go through the required transformations that are in front of businesses now and in the future. And I think so there's key things is one is adapting the way we audit. Secondly, is actually looking at the way in which we approach the return and the value of auditing and compliance. And the third area is actually tracking in a way to ensure that we are communicating, understanding, and driving value to actually accelerate that progress of transformation. And the faster you can do that, the more likely you are to succeed in your transformation.
But if it hasn't, why didn't it work? Did we ask the wrong question? So transformation, if you have it as a cycle, an actual closing cycle, you should always ask yourself 3-6 months down the line, did it work? Did the change have the outcome we wanted? And I think that's what's usually missing is the transformation cycle is the effectiveness of the purpose initially raised.
I agree. And a learning organization is constantly changing, constantly transforming, constantly developing. And that needs to be deep within an organization's culture.
Thank you so much, Ian and Sandy, for your insights. This has been a delightful conversation. You have been listening to Quality Impact and the Role of Quality in Auditing with Ian Mitchell, CEO of DeepFathom, and Sandy Domingos Shipley, an ISO consultant at Systems Link and author of How to Build a World-Class Business One Brick at a Time. Thanks to our guests, Ian and Sandy. Thanks to our producer, Luke Nixon. I've been your host, Rashad Issa. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit subscribe, follow, share, and leave us a review. See you next month.
You've been listening to a CQI podcast.